they have it. Jesus says, you're going through the methods. You're going through the motions. You're doing everything that you see the Jews do. But you worship what you know not. You don't even know what you're worshiping. And I'm afraid there are millions of people every week going through the motions, lifting their hands, repeating what we say, but they still worship what they know not. Verse 22 is applicable to today. Back up to verse 21, because Jesus mentions worship the Father. Do you see that? She wasn't coming up there to worship the Father. She was going through the motions and the movements and the mannerisms and the mechanics of quote unquote worshiping God. But notice in verse 21, Jesus did not say worship Jehovah or worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He does not refer again to God's covenant name. This is so good. But he introduces a dimension within Jehovah that no one up until the manifestation of the sun in the earth, the sun seed planted to yield a harvest of righteousness and of sonship. Jesus introduces her to an entirely different concept of the kingdom, of the core of God, of Jehovah, that no one knew. He says worship who? The Father. This is so good. Now, he introduces also this word called proskuneo, and I said this. I introduced that word proskuneo to you because that's what worship is, proskuneo. It means to kiss. Stay with me. To bow, to fall, to kiss. We don't hear that in the teaching on worship. We hear about the hand raising and the hands raising and the singing and the clapping. We're taken through all of the Jewish forms of praise, and then we're given these the rudiments, the practices, the manners, the motions, and the movements. And we're saying that that's worship. But this is not about singing. Watch this. This is not about clapping hands. He introduces a phenomenon, a paradigm, a powerful principle of proskuneo, which means to kiss. This is important because I want you to get this. I'm going to be methodical and deliberate. Worship, he says, to proskuneo the Father, to kiss the Father. Ye worship, ye know not what. This is verse 22. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. Look at verse 23. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall proskuneo the Father in spirit and in truth. So we're seeing Father mentioned again. Now, I'm sure she's flummoxed and bewildered because he's mentioning Father. Like, who? Now, we're taking for granted we know what he's talking about. But take yourself out of it. Put yourself in her stead. Jesus is mentioning Father. No one has ever mentioned that. All the years they've mimicked, parroted this practice. They have never heard. She's never heard, I'm sure. I am confident she's never heard about worshiping God as Father. This is an entirely new concept. This is a sort of a Nicodemus-esque experience on another scale. Just earlier in St. John chapter 3, Jesus introduces a new kingdom concept to Nicodemus, a ruler who is stymied and struggling, grappling with this concept Jesus introduces him to, and that is rebirth, regeneration. He's known the law. He knows of the Torah. He understands the tenets of it. He knows circumcision, but Nicodemus has never heard of regeneration, never heard of being born again. That's why he struggled. Come on, stay with me. St. John chapter 3, Nicodemus is struggling. Why? Because the Son of God, amen, Yeshua is introducing concepts of the kingdom that only he as the only begotten knew. So he's saying, you got to be born from above. You got to be born from above. That's what he says in St. John chapter 3. We are introduced to now Father and the being born again concept of, so that's how God is a father and can be father in St. John chapter 3. So Nicodemus is grappling with this concept. This woman has to be grappling with this as well because he's introducing new concepts. I want you to shout back at me, new concepts, new theology, new doctrine, new themes, new perspectives. And when you're as wineskins and you're old and you're rigid and all you know is the law, and in her case, all you know is mimicking those who are practicing the law, he's introducing something new. And I'm sure he has her attention, but he's mentioning Father. Who, your Father? Who, Father, are you talking about? And he mentions Father again. In verse 23, worshiping the Father. He mentions Father twice. Are you seeing that in verse 23? So you have worshiping the Father. Jesus is talking about the Father. He is not mentioning, I think I make my case. He's not mentioning, amen, Elohim or El Shaddai. He's not mentioning any of these names that God has. But he's gotten to the core now. Because, watch this, now God can emerge. Now God can be revealed as Father. Now Father can emerge. Now Father is revealed. Why? Because the Son has manifested. Christmas Day is Father's Day. Now Father is manifested. Christ's Day, his day in which he crowned and he is pushed out and Mary conceives, rather delivers what she's conceived, carried full term, and the day has come for her to be delivered. She pushes out, and when Mary pushes out the Savior, she pushes out the Messiah. That very day, that very birthday, Christ's birthday in the earth is truly Father's Day from heaven to earth, because now what was hidden in God, Father at his core, can now emerge, and he could be what he's always wanted to be to his people, a father to children. From Genesis to Malachi, we saw the Father being God. And now from the day that Christ crowned and was delivered and birthed into the earth, now God can be Father. From Genesis to Malachi, the Father had to be God. Why? There was no children. You're not a father until you have children. There is no child to be a father to until his Son, the only begotten, the monogenes, manifested in the earth. This is so good. And when Mary, this young virgin, pushes out the Savior and he crowns and he comes out at that very moment, there is a shifting, and now Father emerges out of God. From Genesis to Malachi, it is the Father revealing himself as God. From the beginning of Christ in the earth to up until this very moment, now God can be Father. And I have to tell you, people of God that are still struggling with this concept. It's a concept that you have to grab hold of if you're going to walk into the kingdom. Because in Father is every name. In Father is every name. His character, his makeup, watch this, his righteousness, watch this. But it cannot be bestowed unto you except you receive him as Father. Because in the Old Testament, under the old law, under the God being God, Father being God, he was not regenerating his people. So although they're called the children of Abraham, although they are called the children of God, they are not acting like children. Why? Because they have not been regenerated, which hence is why he gave us the promise of the Spirit in Joel. Why he gave us the promise of the Spirit. Are you hearing me? In his word, in the book of Ezekiel. That's why we've been reading that. Because the promise of the Spirit, the indwelling of the Spirit, the writing the laws of the table. See, that's a genealogy thing. That's a genetic thing. It's called genetic coding. Writing laws on the tables. That's called genetic coding. This was all the scientific mind of God, the brilliance of God to use genetic coding terms. I'm going to take my laws with my finger, writing them on tables of stone. Oh, no longer will I write them on tables of stone. I'm going to remove the stony heart, and I'm going to write my laws on the tables of your heart. That's genetic coding. The DNA and the RNA, the ribonucleic acid, and the deoxyribonucleic acid of God. His water, the water is the word, and his spirit, the words that I give you, they are spirit and they are life.